Daniel Rivers knelt on cold concrete at 5:47 in the morning, pressing his ear against the base of a machine worth more than everything he'd owned in his entire life. The vibration traveled through his skull like a whisper
How could you let
only
this
he could
happen?
translate.
I told you
An
an
Behind
accident.
him,
That's an
small
accident.
fingers
An
clutched the
accident?
fabric of
Yes.
his work jacket. I hear it too, Dad. Lily's voice barely rose above the hum of the facility. The crying sound. The door behind them crashed open. Fluorescent light spilled across the testing bay floor, and Victoria Cross stepped through, flanked by 2 security guards. Her heels struck the concrete in sharp, measured beats. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost what Daniel made in 6 months, and her expression carried the particular coldness of someone who'd built walls so high she'd forgotten what stood on the other side. "Get him out, now!" The guards moved forward, but Daniel didn't lift his head from the machine. His eyes stayed closed, his breathing shallow as he tracked the frequency variance in the turbine's rotation. 72 hours. Maybe less. The harmonic interference pattern was accelerating faster than he'd calculated from the data on that abandoned screen 3 nights ago. "Ma'am." His voice came out steady, though his hands trembled where Lily couldn't see them. "This turbine will fail within 72 hours. The acoustic signature shows—" Victoria's hand cut through the air. "I don't care what you think you hear. You're a janitor who broke into a restricted area with a child. Security removed them both." But this story doesn't start here. It starts with a man who lost everything and chose to become invisible. 8 years earlier, Daniel had stood in a different room wearing a different suit, holding a laser pointer that shook in his grip as he advanced through slide 17 of 23. The conference room at Midwest Packaging Solutions smelled like burnt coffee and the particular sweat of men who knew the quarterly numbers weren't adding up. Amelia sat in the back row, arms crossed, the only person in the room who met his eyes when he said the words no one wanted to hear. The boiler in Building C will experience catastrophic failure within 3 weeks. The microfracture in the pressure relief housing creates a resonance pattern at 42 Hz that— Stop. Gerald Hoffman, the plant manager, didn't look up from his phone. "How much, excuse me, how much to fix your imaginary problem?" Daniel's throat went dry. $11,000. 2 days of shutdown for— "We can't shut down every time some consultant hears a funny noise." Hoffman finally looked at him, and his eyes held the particular contempt reserved for people who complicated simple profit margins. "The equipment was inspected 6 weeks ago. It's fine." Amelia stood up in the back. Daniel watched her jaw tighten, watched her hands curl into fists at her sides. She was 7 months pregnant with Lily, and the fluorescent lights caught the silver bracelet on her wrist that he'd given her the day they got married in a courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon because neither of them could afford to miss work. "Gerald, if Daniel says there's a problem, there's a problem." Her voice carried the authority of 3 years as floor supervisor of someone who'd earned respect by knowing every person on the line by name. "I've worked with this equipment every day for—" "Then you should know it's working fine." Hoffman stood gathering his papers. "We're done here. Send me the invoice for today, Rivers. We won't be needing follow-up analysis." 17 days later, Daniel was installing a car seat in their Honda Civic when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but Amelia was inside the apartment arguing with the insurance company about coverage for Lily's upcoming vaccinations, and he needed the break from hearing her voice crack with frustration at the hold music. "Is this Daniel Rivers? Speaking." "This is Captain Morrison with Chicago Fire Department. There's been an incident at Midwest Packaging Solutions building. C. Your wife was listed as an emergency contact for—" The rest dissolved into white noise punctuated by words that didn't fit together. "Boiler explosion, 3 casualties, critical condition, Northwestern Memorial." The phone slipped from his hand and cracked against the driveway screen, spiderwebbing like the fracture he'd tried to warn them about, and somewhere inside the apartment, Lily started crying as if she already knew. Amelia died at 4:32 in the morning while Daniel held her hand and promised things he couldn't deliver. Lily was 7 months old. She would never remember her mother's laugh or the way Amelia drew machinery in the margins of grocery lists or how she'd hum off-key while cooking and refuse to admit she was tone-deaf. The lawsuit consumed 2 years and everything Daniel had saved. The depositors from Midwest Packaging wore suits that made Hoffman's look cheap, and they had a legal team from a firm that billed more per hour than Daniel earned in a week. They brought in expert witnesses who explained to the jury that acoustic analysis wasn't standard methodology, that microfractures couldn't be detected by sound alone, that Daniel's conclusions were speculative at best. The court ruled the evidence inconclusive. Daniel lost. The legal fees bankrupted him. 6 days after the verdict, he woke up on a cold floor in Northwestern Memorial Psychiatric Ward with no memory of how he'd gotten there, and a social worker asking gentle questions about whether he felt capable of caring for an infant alone. He'd stood in that hospital room with its pale green walls and motivational poster about taking life one day at a time, and he'd made a decision. No more engineering, no more consulting, no more standing in conference rooms begging people to listen to truths they didn't want to hear. He would find a job that let him work nights, be home during the day with Lily, and disappear into a life so small that nothing could hurt them again. The classified ad in the Tribune was small: night custodial position, Apex Energy Corporation, competitive pay benefits after 90 days. He applied on a Wednesday and started the following Monday. Nobody asked about his background. Nobody cared. Janitors didn't have backgrounds. They had mops. 4 years later, Daniel still worked the 11 to 7 shift. He knew every restroom on every floor, knew which elevator made a grinding sound at the third-floor stop that nobody else seemed to notice, knew that the HVAC system on the 38th floor cycled at irregular intervals because the thermostat calibration had drifted 0.3 degrees over the past 18 months. He moved through the building like a ghost, emptying trash cans, replacing paper towels, buffing floors to a shine that reflected the lives of people who had important meetings and made decisions that mattered. At 7:02 each morning, he clocked out, grabbed his jacket from a locker that smelled like industrial cleaner, and walked 3 blocks through Chicago's South Side to catch the 7:12 bus. The ride took 18 minutes. He walked 2 more blocks to the apartment above Mr. Park's laundromat on Ashland Avenue, where the machines ran 24 hours, and the building vibrated with the rhythm of industrial washers that needed maintenance Mr. Park couldn't afford. Mrs. Chen always waited at her door across the hall. She was 68, originally from Shanghai, and she'd lived in Chicago longer than Daniel had been alive. She watched Lily from 11 at night until 7 in the morning for $200 a week, and she never asked questions about why a man with an MIT degree cleaned toilets for a living. She had bad dream again. Mrs. Chen handed over Lily's backpack already packed for school. Woke up at 4:30. I gave her warm milk. Thank you, Maria. I don't know what I'd... You don't owe me anything. That child is a blessing. She squeezed his arm with surprising strength for someone so small. You're good, Father Daniel. Don't forget that. Inside the apartment, Lily had fallen asleep on the couch instead of her bed. She'd dragged her blanket out and curled up with her ear pressed against the wall. Daniel knelt beside her, smoothing hair away from her face. She had Amelia's eyes, dark and serious, and the same crease between her eyebrows when she concentrated. Hey, robot girl. Her eyes opened slowly. The washing machine downstairs is making the tired sound again. Daniel listened. Through the floor, through the wall, he could hear the rhythm of Mr. Park's industrial washer. Lily was right. The bearing was degrading, creating friction in the drum rotation. He could hear the drag every third cycle, a sound so subtle it registered as feeling more than noise. You're right. I'll tell Mr. Park. Will he fix it? I hope so. Lily sat up, studying his face with an intensity that made his chest ache. Dad, why do people wait until things break? He went to the kitchen, pulled out flour and eggs and a banana going brown at the edges. Pancakes with robot faces had been their ritual since she was 3, since the morning after a nightmare when nothing else would make her smile. He mixed the batter by hand, no measuring cups, the same way Amelia used to do it. Because fixing things before they break means admitting something's wrong. He poured the first pancake, used a spoon to add eyes and a mouth. And most people don't want to do that. That's dumb. Yeah, it is. They ate breakfast while morning light crept through the window, turning the kitchen golden. Lily told him about the science project she was planning, something involving sound waves and how different materials absorbed vibration. She'd drawn diagrams in her notebook that showed an understanding of acoustic principles that most adults never grasped. Daniel listened and made encouraging sounds and tried not to think about how much she was like him, how that gift of hearing the invisible might break her heart the same way it had broken his. At 8:15 they walked to the bus stop for her school. Chicago morning traffic roared around them, and the smell of exhaust mixed with something baking at the corner bakery. Lily held his hand and talked about a girl named Sarah who'd invited her to a birthday party on Saturday, and whether Daniel thought it would be okay to bring a homemade present instead of something from a store. Sarah's parents won't care what you bring as long as it comes from you. But the other kids always bring stuff from Target. Her voice went small. Sometimes I think they think we're weird. Daniel stopped walking. He crouched down so they were eye level right there on the sidewalk, with people streaming past on their way to jobs that paid better and came with titles that meant something. Listen to me. We're not weird. We're just us. And anyone who can't see how special that is doesn't deserve your energy. He touched her forehead gently, the way he used to check for fever when she was small. You hear things other people miss. That's not weird. That's magic. Magic that makes me different. Different is good, Lily. Different is how things get better. She nodded, but he could see the doubt in her eyes, the weight of 8 years spent not quite fitting in. The school bus rounded the corner, brakes squealing in a way that meant the pads needed replacement within the month. Lily climbed on, turning at the top step to wave, and Daniel waved back until the bus disappeared into traffic. He walked home alone past the laundromat where Mr. Park was already working on a machine that had broken down during the night, past Mrs. Chen's apartment where he could hear her television playing the morning news. Inside his own apartment, he stood in the kitchen and stared at the refrigerator covered in Lily's drawings. Machines, always machines. Turbines and engines and gears rendered with the precise detail of someone who saw how things connected, how force transferred, how energy flowed. Just like Amelia used to draw. His hands started shaking. He gripped the counter edge until his knuckles went white, breathing through his nose, counting backwards from 10 in the technique the therapist had taught him before he'd stopped going to sessions because he couldn't afford the copay. The panic attack didn't fully hit. He'd gotten better at heading them off, at recognizing the warning signs before the world tilted sideways. He made it to the couch and lay down, staring at the ceiling while his heart rate gradually slowed. Somewhere above him, someone's footsteps crossed a floor. Somewhere below, the washing machines rumbled their endless cycle. The building breathed around him, and he listened to every sound, cataloging and categorizing, and trying not to hear the things that would require him to act. At 10:30 that night, he put on his work jacket and walked back to the bus stop. The evening shift was ending at Apex Energy, and he passed men and women in business clothes, heading home to families, to apartments nicer than his, to lives that didn't involve mopping floors and cleaning toilets. He entered through the service entrance where the security guard Marcus barely looked up from his phone. The building at night was different, quieter. The executive floors emptied out and the hum of machinery became more pronounced. Daniel pushed his cart to the 20th floor and started his routine. Empty trash replaced liner wipe-down surfaces, check paper towel dispensers. The work required no thought, which was exactly why he'd chosen it. His mind could drift while his hands stayed busy. He was on the 22nd floor of the engineering level when he saw the light. Someone had left an office door open, and the blue glow of a computer monitor spilled into the hallway. Daniel almost kept walking. Not his business. Not his problem. But his feet slowed, and he found himself standing in the doorway looking at the screen. Project Gulf Wind. Technical schematic. 12 offshore wind turbines positioned 25 miles off the Louisiana coast. The display showed a cross-section of the turbine array with acoustic data overlays, frequency analysis, stress distribution models. His eyes tracked across the data, and his brain started processing patterns before he could stop it. The turbines were networked, physically connected through the seabed mounting structure, sharing load data through centralized management software. and there in the acoustic signature overlay, he could see the problem as clearly as if someone had drawn it in red ink. Harmonic interference. The turbines were singing to each other through the foundation, each one producing a unique frequency signature. Most had found natural resonance synchronizing their vibrations into a stable pattern. But 5 units showed a different signature. 5 units positioned where ocean current data suggested additional external vibration, introducing a third harmonic that didn't match the network's natural frequency. The new monitoring software, he could see the update timestamp 6 weeks old, had increased sensor sensitivity, but the algorithm couldn't distinguish between external vibration and internal stress. It was reading the harmonic dissonance as a structural threat and triggering emergency shutdowns. Daniel's chest constricted. His breath came short. The data on the screen blurred as his vision tunneled, and suddenly he wasn't in an office at Apex Energy. He was in a conference room at Midwest Packaging, pointing at data that showed a boiler screaming for help, watching men ignore him because the numbers said everything was fine. He stumbled backward into the hallway, his shoulder hitting the wall. His hands found the cool surface and he pressed his palms flat, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3. The therapist's voice in his memory. Ground yourself. Name 5 things you can see. Ceiling tiles, fluorescent lights, exit sign, fire extinguisher, his own hands. 4 things you can touch. Wall, floor, fabric of his jacket, the ID badge clipped to his belt. 3 things you can hear. Ventilation system, elevator cables, his own heartbeat. The panic receded slowly, leaving him hollowed out and shaking. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor of an empty hallway at 11:47 at night, holding his phone with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. He pulled up his photos and found Lily's latest school picture, gap-toothed smile eyes bright with the kind of hope he'd lost somewhere along the way. "What do I do, baby?" The building hummed around him. Thousands of systems running, cycling, maintaining the infrastructure that kept this corporate cathedral standing. Most people never heard them. Most people moved through their days, never noticing the machines that made everything possible. But Daniel heard them all, had always heard them, couldn't stop hearing them, even when the truth they told would cost him everything. He finished his shift on autopilot. At 7:02 he clocked out and caught the bus home. He made pancakes with robot faces and walked Lily to school. He came back to the apartment and lay on his bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw that data overlay and heard the turbines screaming in frequencies no one else could detect. At 3 in the afternoon, his phone rang. Unknown number. His thumb hovered over the decline button, but something made him answer. "Is this Daniel Rivers?" Speaking. "Mr. Rivers, this is Victoria Cross. I'm the CEO of Apex Energy Corporation. I'd like to speak with you about something that appeared on our security footage." His stomach dropped. "I didn't touch anything. You were just standing outside our testing facility at 2:37 this morning, listening to our prototype turbine with your eyes closed, while your daughter told security you could hear it crying." Victoria's voice carried the particular sharpness of someone who'd built an empire by never showing weakness. "The guards thought you were drunk or having some kind of episode, but then I had it pull your employee file." Daniel closed his eyes. "I can explain." "No need. I had our security team run a deeper background check. MIT full scholarship. Graduated summa cum laude. 3 published papers on acoustic resonance in marine environments that my chief engineer apparently cited when designing the mounting system for Project Gulf Wind. Defense contractor work that's still classified." A pause. "And then nothing. Until you appeared on our custodial payroll 4 years ago." "Mrs. Cross, I just cleaned the building. I don't—" "You stood outside our testing bay for 47 seconds with your eyes closed, listening to a turbine that's part of a $6 billion contract set to fail in less than a week. My entire engineering team has been working on this problem for 2 weeks, and they can't figure out why 3 of 12 units keep seizing during testing." Her voice shifted, the corporate armor cracking just enough to let something desperate through. "So I'm going to ask you directly. Do you know what's wrong with my turbines? Daniel sat up on the bed. Through the wall, he could hear Mrs. Chen's television, a game show where people competed for prizes by guessing the prices of things they'd never be able to afford. Below him, Mr. Park's washing machines rumbled on the bearing, grinding itself toward inevitable failure. Yes, the word came out before he could stop it. I know what's wrong. Then I need you to come to my office tonight and explain it to my chief engineer. No, his voice surprised him with its firmness. I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Mr. Rivers, we have 5 days before the German Investment Consortium arrives for a demonstration. If those turbines fail during the demo, we lose the contract. If we lose the contract, Apex Energy goes under and 800 people lose their jobs. Victoria's breath crackled through the phone. I'm not asking you to join the company or change your life. I'm asking you to spend one evening looking at data and telling me what you hear, please. The last time I told someone what I heard, they ignored me and my wife died. The words fell into silence like stones into deep water. I filed a report. I called them twice. I explained exactly what would happen. They said my methodology wasn't standard. They said I was speculating. 17 days later, a boiler exploded and killed 3 people. He could hear Victoria breathing on the other end, could almost hear her recalculating her approach. I read about that case, about Amelia. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't bring her back. No, it doesn't. Victoria's voice dropped lower, and for the first time it sounded human instead of corporate. But sitting on information that could save lives doesn't honor her either. You know that, or you wouldn't have stopped outside that testing bay. You would have walked past like you've walked past everything else for 4 years. Daniel pressed his free hand against his eyes. What makes you think I'll help you? Because you already answered the phone. Because you're still listening. And because if I'm right about you, you can't walk away from this any more than I can. At 6:30 that evening, Daniel made dinner for Lily. Spaghetti with meat sauce, her favorite, though she mostly pushed it around her plate while talking about the Soundwave project. She'd figured out that different materials created different resonance patterns, and she wanted to build a display showing how sound moved through wood versus metal versus water. That's brilliant, robot girl. You could probably take it to the state science fair. Really? Her face lit up in a way that made his chest ache. You think it's good enough? I think you're going to change the world someday. At 7:30 he called Mrs. Chen and asked if she could watch Lily for a few extra hours. At 8:15 he walked Lily across the hall, her backpack stuffed with homework and the book she was reading about a girl who built robots. Mrs. Chen took her hand and gave Daniel a look that said she knew something was different but wouldn't ask unless he wanted to tell. At 9:47, Daniel walked through the service entrance of Apex Energy Corporation wearing jeans and a work jacket instead of his usual uniform. Lily walked beside him in pink pajamas with little robots printed on them, carrying her backpack. The security guard Marcus looked up from his desk and frowned. Rivers, you're not on shift tonight. Mrs. Cross asked me to come in. She should have called down. Marcus checked his computer, eyebrows rising. Yeah, okay. She's waiting on 22. He looked at Lily. But the kid can't. She goes where I go. Non-negotiable. They took the elevator in silence. Lily held his hand, her small fingers warm and trusting. At the 22nd floor, the doors opened onto a hallway lit bright as noon, and Victoria Cross stood waiting. She was shorter than Daniel expected, maybe 5'6", in heels that added 3 inches. The severe suit had been replaced by dark slacks and a white blouse, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and without the corporate armor she looked younger, more human, and absolutely exhausted. Mr. Rivers. She extended her hand and he shook it briefly. Thank you for coming. Lily tugged his sleeve. Dad, is she your boss? Victoria's expression softened in a way that transformed her face completely. She crouched down to Lily's level, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of the CEO sharpness. I am. And you must be the young lady who can hear machines cry. They're not really crying. That's just what it sounds like when something's wrong. Lily looked up at Daniel for confirmation. Right, Dad. Right. Victoria stood, and something passed across her face too quick to read. "Come with me. Thomas is waiting." The conference room looked like a war zone. Whiteboards covered every wall filled with equations and diagrams and crossed-out theories. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered the table. At the far end, a man built like a refrigerator stood over a laptop, his hair gray at the temples, his shoulders carrying the particular tension of someone who'd stopped sleeping 3 days ago. He looked up when they entered, and his face went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion, recognition, then something hard and angry. "Victoria, what the hell is this?" "Thomas, this is Daniel Rivers." "I know who he is. He cleans the bathrooms on my floor." Thomas looked at Lily, then back at Victoria. "You called me back here at 10 o'clock at night to have the janitor look at classified turbine schematics while he babysits his kid. I called you back because in 48 hours Brennan Energy walks into this building and we have nothing to show them except 6 weeks of failure." Victoria's voice could have cut glass. "So yes, Thomas, I'm asking the janitor. Sit down." Thomas didn't sit. He turned to Daniel, and his face carried the particular contempt of a man who'd built a career on credentials and saw someone without them as fundamentally lesser. "No offense, pal, but this isn't a washing machine. These are the most advanced offshore turbine systems ever built in America. You don't have the first idea what you're looking at." Daniel didn't respond. He was already looking at the screens, his eyes tracking across the schematics the same way he'd tracked them 3 nights ago. The data overlay showed stress distributions, vibration patterns, sensor readings from all 12 turbines. His brain processed the information faster than conscious thought, building a 3-dimensional model of the acoustic relationships. "You networked them." The words came out flat automatic. Thomas blinked. "Of course we networked them. That's the whole point. Distributed load management requires, how are they coupled mechanically or through software? Both." Thomas's voice shifted slightly defensive now instead of dismissive. "The turbines share load data through a central management system, and the structural housings connect via the seabed mounting framework. So they're physically connected." "They share a foundation structure, yes." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the screens. The pattern was clearer now, sharper. He could almost hear the turbines through the data, could feel the vibration in his bones, the same way he'd felt the washing machine through the apartment floor. "And the monitoring software. You updated it recently." Thomas glanced at Victoria. 6 weeks ago. We increased the sensitivity of the stress sensors, standard protocol for testing phase." "Who set the threshold parameters?" "I did, based on manufacturer specifications." "For individual units or for the network?" Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. His face went pale. "For individual units. Network behavior is managed separately by the central system, which uses aggregate data." "And aggregate data wouldn't flag a problem that only exists in the relationship between units." The room went absolutely silent. Daniel could hear the ventilation system cycling, could hear Thomas's breathing change, could hear Victoria's sharp intake of breath as she understood what he was saying before Thomas did. "What are you suggesting?" Thomas's voice had lost all its edge, replaced by something careful and afraid. "I need to hear them." Daniel looked at Victoria instead of Thomas. "Not the data, the actual sound. Raw audio recordings from every unit. Unfiltered, no processing." Thomas stared at him. "We have telemetry data that—" "I don't want telemetry. I want sound. The actual sound these turbines make when they're running and when they fail." Victoria nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Thomas, pull the audio files." "Victoria, we should consult with—" "Pull the files. Now." Thomas's jaw worked, but he moved to the terminal and started typing. His fingers hit the keys harder than necessary, and Daniel could read the war happening behind his eyes. This violated every protocol Thomas had built his career on. This meant trusting someone without credentials, without verification, without the proper channels. This meant admitting that maybe possibly the data hadn't been enough. 20 minutes later, Thomas had the audio ready. Raw acoustic recordings captured by underwater microphones during both successful and failed test runs, converted to digital files that could be analyzed by someone who knew how to listen. "Can you patch a second set of headphones to the same feed?" Thomas connected another pair without speaking. Daniel handed them to Lily, and she put them on with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this before. She'd sat with him in the apartment, sometimes listening to recordings he played of various machines, learning to hear the patterns that indicated health or sickness. "Nobody talks while I'm listening." Daniel looked directly at Thomas. Not a word. He pulled on the headphones and closed his eyes. Beside him, Lily did the same. The rest of the room faded away, and there was only the sound. The turbines sang. Each one produced its own voice, a complex harmonic built from blade rotation, mechanical friction, structural vibration, and the interaction between metal and water. Most people would hear only noise, undifferentiated rumble. But Daniel heard individual instruments in an orchestra, each contributing to a larger pattern. Units 1 through 7 and 9 through 12 had found synchronization. Their frequencies wove together in a stable resonance, each voice complementing the others. But units 3, 5, 8, 10, and 11 sang a different song. Their harmonics clashed with the network, creating interference patterns that ebbed and flowed with the rhythm of ocean currents. He could hear it now, could feel it in the way the sound made his teeth ache and his chest tighten. The dissonance built over time, accumulating stress in the monitoring software's sensitivity threshold until the system interpreted the interference as imminent structural failure and triggered an emergency shutdown. At the 22-minute mark, Lily opened her eyes and tugged his sleeve. He pulled off his headphones and leaned down. She whispered something in his ear, and he nodded. "Play the failure sequence from Unit 7 again. Overlay it with operational audio from Unit 4. Same timestamp." Thomas pulled up the files. Daniel listened for 90 more seconds, tracking the way the harmonic interference spiked right before the shutdown, the way the frequency pattern matched exactly what he'd expect from current-driven vibration resonating through a fixed structure. He removed the headphones and stood up. Thomas was staring at him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite parse. Victoria had her arms crossed, waiting. "They're singing to each other." Thomas blinked. "What?" "The turbines. They're acoustically coupled through the seabed mounting structure. When they spin, each produces a unique harmonic signature, like voices. It's subtle, but it's there. The operational units have found natural resonance with each other. They've synchronized." "That's not possible. The units are independent. They're physically connected through the foundation. Sound travels through solid material faster and more efficiently than through water. These turbines are talking to each other whether you designed them to or not." Thomas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Daniel could see the gears turning, could watch the engineer's brain catching up to the implications. The 5 failed units are positioned where ocean current patterns create additional external vibration. Daniel pulled up the installation map on the nearest screen, pointing to the locations. That vibration introduces a third harmonic into the system, a frequency that doesn't match the natural resonance of the network. Your new monitoring software detects the dissonance, but it can't distinguish between external vibration and internal stress. So it reads the interference as a structural threat and triggers emergency shutdown. Lily's voice cut through from her seat at the end of the table, clear and certain. "The turbines aren't failing. They're scared." Everyone turned to look at her. She stood up, clutching her backpack, and walked to the screen where Daniel had marked the failed unit positions. "They feel something that doesn't match, and they don't know if it's dangerous. So they stop. It's like when you hear a weird sound in the dark and you freeze because you don't know if it's bad." She looked at Daniel. "Right, Dad." "Right." He turned back to Thomas and Victoria. "She's right. The shutdown isn't a malfunction. It's a protection response. The system thinks it's under stress, so it stops. You don't have a mechanical problem. You have a perception problem. The machines are misinterpreting what they feel." Thomas Gaines sat down very slowly. His hands spread flat on the table as if he needed to hold on to something solid. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. Pull up the vibration data from the seabed sensors. Daniel's voice was gentle now, the way you'd speak to someone in shock. Filter for frequencies between 18 and 42 Hz. Compare failed sites to operational sites. Thomas typed with fingers that shook slightly. The screen populated with waveforms overlapping patterns in blues and reds and greens. Even Victoria could see it now. The failed sites had an additional oscillation that the operational sites didn't show, a regular pulse that matched the frequency range Daniel had specified. "Oh my God." Thomas's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "It's the Croilo effect. Ocean current harmonics resonating through foundation structure. It's well documented in submarine acoustics." Daniel paused. "I published a paper on it 12 years ago." Thomas looked up and his eyes were wet. Cole M.J. Acoustic Resonance Propagation and Fixed Marine Structures, Journal of Marine Engineering, October issue. His voice cracked. "That was you." "That was me." Thomas put both hands over his face. His shoulders shook, and the sound that came out wasn't quite a sob but carried all the weight of one. When he lowered his hands, his face was blotched red. "I cited that paper. When we designed the mounting system, I cited your paper. And I didn't account for cross-unit resonance because I assumed the software would handle it." He looked at Daniel with something that might have been grief or rage or both. "I made the exact mistake your paper warned about." The room held its breath. Daniel didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't change expression at all. He just stood there in his work jacket and jeans, looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Can you fix it?" Victoria's question cut through the silence. "Yes." Daniel's voice was steady. "2 changes needed. First, add a bandpass filter to the monitoring software that separates external harmonic frequencies from internal stress signatures. That stops the false shutdowns. If your team starts now, 6 to 8 hours. And second, permanent fix. Install vibration dampers at the connection points between turbine housings and seabed structure. Rubber composite, nothing exotic. It decouples the acoustic relationship so the units can't interfere with each other. Fabrication takes a day, installation another day if you have divers ready from New Orleans. Victoria's fingers drummed against the table. "That gives us 12 hours to spare before the demo." Thomas was already typing, pulling up software architecture, sending messages to team members. His fingers moved fast, but his eyes kept drifting back to Daniel with an expression that was part shame, part awe, and part something else that looked like a man watching 30 years of certainty collapse. "Mr. Cole," Thomas's voice was different now, stripped of armor. "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't." "I called you a janitor. I told my boss this was a waste of time. I was wrong." "You were doing your job. You just forgot to listen." Daniel pulled off the headphones completely and handed them back to Thomas. Lily had already packed hers away and was standing by the door, her backpack on her eyes, heavy with the particular exhaustion of a 10-year-old who'd stayed up way past bedtime. "Ma'am, if we're done, I need to get my daughter to bed." "We're done." Victoria stood. "Thank you, Mr. Rivers." Daniel took Lily's hand and turned toward the door. They'd almost made it to the hallway when he stopped. He didn't turn around, just spoke to the room behind him. "Miss Cross." "Yes." "The next time your machines try to tell you something, don't wait for them to scream. Listen when they whisper." He walked out. Lily looked back over her shoulder and gave a small wave. Then they were gone. Footsteps fading down the hall toward the elevator. Victoria sat in the conference room with Thomas Gaines and the ghosts of every assumption they'd both made. Thomas was already deep in code, assembling his team, remotely implementing the filter Daniel had described. But his hands paused on the keyboard, and he looked up at her with eyes that had seen something they couldn't unsee. "Victoria." "Yes." "Who the hell was that man?" She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling, at the fluorescent lights that had witnessed this entire impossible night. "Someone we almost never found." Thomas worked through the night with a focus Daniel recognized from his own younger days before everything broke. By dawn, the software filter was running on test servers, parameters calibrated to separate ocean current harmonics from genuine structural stress. At 8:14 in the morning, Victoria stood in the monitoring room with Thomas and 6 other engineers watching Unit 7 spin up for the first time since the modifications went live. The turbine powered on clean. Data scrolled across screens in perfect green columns, and the acoustic profile showed no interference, no false readings, no phantom threats that would trigger protective shutdown. 10 seconds, 30, 1 minute, 5 minutes. Holding steady. Thomas's voice cracked on the second word. All parameters nominal. No shutdown trigger. Victoria pressed her hand against the glass separating her from the server racks and let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like weeks. Through the window, morning light turned Chicago's skyline into a geometry of glass and steel, and somewhere in that vast sprawl, Daniel Rivers was probably making breakfast for his daughter, unaware that he'd just saved 800 jobs with a single night's insight. Run the same test on Units 3, 5, 9, and 11. One by one, the failed turbines came back online, every single one held. The monitoring software distinguished between harmonic interference and actual stress with precision that should have been there from the beginning. The dampers would be installed over the next 48 hours as permanent solution, but for the demonstration, the software fix was enough. At 9:17, Victoria called Walter Haynes before he could call her first. "Walter, the turbines are running. All 12 units. Full operation." Silence stretched across the line, the particular quiet of a man recalculating odds he'd thought were locked. "How? I listened to someone I should have listened to weeks ago." She hung up before he could ask for details, before he could start building the narrative that would minimize her victory and maximize the board's inevitable concerns about protocol breaches. Let him scramble. Let him wonder. For the first time in 6 weeks, she had breathing room, and she intended to use every second. At 10:03, she dialed Daniel's number, the one from his employee file that she'd memorized without meaning to. He answered on the 4th ring, voice foggy with sleep deprivation. "Rivers." "Mr. Rivers, the turbines are running. All 12. The software fix worked exactly as you described." A pause filled with what might have been relief or exhaustion or both. "Good. The demonstration is in 2 days. If it goes well, we sign the contract. $6 billion because of what you did last night." "Okay." The flatness in his voice caught her off guard. This was the moment where most people would angle for recognition, leverage a piece of the success. Daniel sounded like she'd told him the weather forecast. "I'd like to offer you a position, senior acoustic consultant. You set your own hours, your own terms. $400,000 annually to start with equity options and—" "No." Victoria closed her eyes, pinching the bridge of her nose where tension had built a permanent camp. "May I ask why?" "Because I've had that life, Miss Cross. Title, office, salary. The one time it mattered, the one time I needed people to listen, they didn't. My wife is dead because people with titles and offices decided a consultant who hears funny noises wasn't worth a 2-day shutdown. I'm not those people. I know you're not. But the job is the same. The system is the same. And I won't put myself inside that system again." Victoria walked to her office window phone pressed to her ear, watching traffic 43 floors below move in patterns that made sense only from this height. "Then what do you want? Name it. Anything." The silence on the other end changed, quality deepened, and she could almost hear him thinking through the implications of honest answer. "I want you to build something." "Build what?" "A listening system. Simple, cheap. Something that goes into factories and plants and warehouses across America, the places where people work with dangerous equipment and nobody pays attention until someone gets hurt. A device that monitors acoustic signatures and warns workers before machines fail, before boilers explode, before someone's wife doesn't come home." Victoria's throat tightened. Through her window, the city spread in every direction, and somewhere in that sprawl were thousands of facilities where machines ran and people trusted that someone was paying attention to the warning signs. Amelia died because an $11,000 repair wasn't worth a 2-day shutdown. There are thousands of factories in this country right now with the same problem. Machines screaming for help and nobody listening. His voice carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. "Build the thing that listens. That's what I want." She sat in her office chair, the expensive one that was supposed to support her back during long hours, and felt something crack open in her chest. The same thing that had been sealed since the day she'd decided power was the only currency that mattered. "I'll do it." "Don't say it if you don't mean it." "I mean it. We'll build it." "Then we have a deal, Miss Cross." The line went dead. Victoria set the phone down carefully and pressed both palms flat against her desk. She stayed like that for several minutes, breathing, listening to the building around her. The ventilation system cycling, the elevator cables humming, the sound of 10,000 machines doing their invisible work to keep this tower standing, to keep the lights on, to keep the world running. For the first time in her career, she actually heard them. James Brennan arrived Friday morning with an entourage that included 7 executives, 2 engineers, and enough lawyers to fill a conference room. He was 68 with white hair and a handshake that still carried the strength of someone who'd worked oil rigs before he'd owned them. He'd built Brennan Energy Partners from a single wildcatter operation in West Texas into the largest renewable energy investor in the southern United States, and his eyes held the particular wariness of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. "Miss Cross." His accent carried the flat vowels of Houston. "I'll be honest, my people advised me to cancel this trip. I'm glad you didn't. Don't be glad yet. Show me something worth $6 billion, and then we'll talk." The monitoring level had been transformed overnight. Every screen showed real-time data from the Gulf Wind Array, and the room hummed with the quiet confidence of engineers who finally had answers that made sense. Thomas stood at the main display, and when he walked Brennan through the technical overview, his voice carried none of the desperation that had colored every presentation for the past 6 weeks. The questions came hard and fast. Brennan's team had done their homework, and they probed every vulnerability, every potential failure point. Thomas answered with precision that bordered on aggressive, and Victoria recognized the behavior. He was defending not just the technology but his own resurrection, the moment when a janitor had shown him how 30 years of expertise could miss the obvious if you forgot to actually listen. "I've seen the data." Brennan leaned forward in his chair, fingers steepled. "Very impressive, but data didn't tell you those turbines were failing, did it?" The room went still. Victoria felt every pair of eyes shift toward her, waiting to see how she'd handle the trap Brennan had just laid. She could tell the sanitized version the story about internal review processes and rapid iteration, the story that kept Daniel invisible and the corporation's image pristine. Or she could tell the truth. A janitor fixed it. The silence that followed was complete enough to hear the ventilation system 3 floors above them. "Excuse me." "One of our night custodial staff. He's a former acoustic engineer with specialized expertise in marine resonance patterns. He diagnosed the problem by listening to the turbines, identified a harmonic interference issue our entire team had missed, and designed the software fix in a single night. The permanent hardware solution is being installed as we speak." Brennan's lead engineer, a woman named Patricia Chen, who held 3 patents in offshore wind technology, leaned over to whisper something urgent in his ear. Brennan waved her off his focus, locked on Victoria. "A janitor. Your chief engineer with 30 years of experience couldn't find what a janitor found." Victoria could feel Thomas's humiliation radiating like heat from where he stood. She chose her words with surgical care. "My chief engineer is one of the best in the industry, but he was solving the wrong problem. He was looking at data. The janitor listened to the machines. There's a difference, and it took me too long to understand that." Brennan studied her face for what felt like an hour compressed into 30 seconds. Then he looked at his team, and something passed between them in the language of glances and minute expressions that came from decades of working together. "Miss Cross, I've been in this business 50 years, sat in rooms with governors and senators and people who talk real pretty about innovation and disruption." He stood up and the room stood with him. "You know what the rarest thing in business is? No. Honesty. You could have told me any story. Given credit to your team, your process, your fancy technology. Instead, you told me a janitor saved your project. He extended his hand. That tells me more about your company than any data presentation ever could. You have a deal. $6 billion. But I have one condition. Victoria shook his hand, maintaining eye contact, even as her pulse kicked into overdrive. Name it. I want to meet this janitor. At 3:47 that afternoon, Victoria stood outside a small apartment above a laundromat on Ashland Avenue, wondering what combination of decisions had led her to this particular moment. The building smelled like industrial detergent and cooking oil, and through the walls she could hear the constant rumble of commercial washing machines that Daniel had probably cataloged down to their individual bearings. She knocked. Footsteps approached light and quick. The door opened to reveal Lily in jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Science is magic that works." Her hair pulled back in a ponytail that was coming loose. "You're the machine lady." Not a question, a statement delivered with the absolute certainty of someone 10 years old. "I suppose I am. Is your father home?" "He's sleeping. He worked all night and then he had to fix Mr. Park's dryer, and then Mrs. Chen needed help moving her couch." Lily studied Victoria with the same intensity Daniel had, as if she could hear truths in the spaces between words. "Are you here to make him go back to being an engineer?" The directness of it caught Victoria off balance. "I'm here to talk to him about a project, something that might help a lot of people." "He already helps people. He just does it quiet." Before Victoria could respond, Daniel appeared behind Lily. Hair messed from sleep, wearing sweatpants and a Northwestern University t-shirt, so faded the logo was barely visible. His eyes went from tired to wary in the span of a blink. "Miss Cross?" "Mr. Rivers, I apologize for showing up unannounced. I wanted to discuss the proposal you made, and I thought a conversation in person might be more productive than playing phone tag." He looked at Lily, then back at Victoria, calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was smaller than Victoria's walk-in closet, but it was clean and organized with the precision of someone who had very little and took care of it all. The refrigerator was covered entirely in Lily's drawings machines, rendered with technical accuracy that would have impressed most engineering students. A small table held homework and library books about physics and sound. The couch showed the permanent indentation of someone who slept there frequently. "Lily, can you give us a few minutes? I want to hear about the project too. If it's about listening to machines, I can help." She crossed her arms in a gesture that was pure stubbornness wrapped in logic. "I helped with the turbines, didn't I?" Daniel's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. "Fine, but homework after." They sat at the table, Victoria in a chair that wobbled slightly, Daniel across from her with Lily perched on the arm of his seat. Victoria pulled out her tablet and opened the preliminary designs her team had mocked up based on Daniel's phone description. "We're calling it the Amelia Protocol. Compact monitoring device roughly the size of a coffee mug. Adhesive mounting compatible with any metal or composite surface. Built-in microphone array, onboard processing, wireless connectivity for alerts. The core is your Acoustic signature library algorithms that can distinguish between healthy operation and degradation patterns." Daniel leaned forward, studying the specs. His finger traced the schematic, and she watched his brain process the engineering faster than most people could read the labels. Battery life. 18 months on current design. We're working on extending that to 24. Cost per unit. Manufactured at scale, about $200. We can subsidize installation for facilities that can't afford upfront costs, fund it through partnerships with OSHA and state safety boards. Who owns the data? Victoria had anticipated this question. The facility. We provide analysis and recommendations, but the acoustic signatures and failure predictions belong to whoever operates the equipment. No corporate access, no selling information to insurance companies or regulators without explicit consent. Daniel sat back, arms crossed, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked almost relaxed. "You've actually thought this through." "I told you I meant it." People say a lot of things they mean in the moment. Mr. Rivers, I built this company from the wreckage my father left behind. I know the difference between good intentions and actual commitment. She closed the tablet and met his eyes. Brennan Energy signed the contract this morning, $6 billion, and James Brennan specifically requested to meet you because I told him the truth about who saved that deal. I could have lied. I could have protected corporate image and kept you invisible. I didn't. Lily looked between them, her expression thoughtful. So you want Dad to help build the listening boxes? I want him to design the core system, the acoustic library, the detection algorithms, the thing that makes it actually work. Victoria shifted her focus to Lily. And I want to make sure he has time to be your dad because that's clearly the most important job he has. Something shifted in Daniel's posture, a fraction of the armor coming down. What's the timeline? Prototype in 6 weeks. Field testing in 3 months. If the data supports it, we push for federal recommendation within a year. She paused. But I need your expertise, not just your initial concept. I need you teaching engineers how to hear what you hear. I work nights. I'm home during the day when Lily needs me. That doesn't change. Then we work around it. Remote consultations, flexible hours, whatever you need. But Mr. Rivers, this is bigger than one person's schedule. This is infrastructure that could prevent hundreds of industrial accidents. Thousands of workers who might actually go home to their families because someone was paying attention to the machines. Daniel's jaw worked, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to hide warring with the part that couldn't walk away from machines that needed help. 6 months. His voice came out rough. Trial period. I consult, I teach your people what I know, I help build the library, but I keep my custodial work. I stay home with Lily, and if at any point this starts to feel like the corporate nightmare I walked away from, I'm done. No argument, no negotiation. Deal. They shook hands across the table that wobbled in an apartment that smelled like laundry detergent, while a 10-year-old watched with eyes that missed nothing. 6 weeks later, the first prototype of the Amelia Protocol arrived in a cardboard box on a Tuesday afternoon. Daniel opened it at his kitchen table while Lily watched her chin resting on folded arms. Inside was a device about the size of a coffee mug, matte black housing with a single green LED and an adhesive pad on the back. It's small. Lily reached out to touch it with one finger, tentative. That's it. The best things usually are. He carried it downstairs to Mr. Park's laundromat. The owner looked up from his newspaper, eyebrows rising when he saw Daniel during daylight hours. You need a machine. I need to borrow one. Just a few minutes. Mr. Park waved his hand. Take whichever. Tuesdays are always slow. Daniel walked to the industrial washer in the back, the one with the bearing that had been degrading for months. He peeled the adhesive backing off the Amelia unit and pressed it against the machine's side panel. The green LED pulsed once, twice, then held steady. He pulled out his phone and opened the companion app that Victoria's team had built to his specifications. The device lit up. Data started flowing, frequency analysis and harmonic pattern mapping, baseline calibration running in real time. The app displayed a dashboard so simple a child could read it. Green for healthy, yellow for watch, red for danger. Daniel started the washer. It rumbled to life, filling with water, beginning its cycle. The Amelia unit listened, and 30 seconds later the indicator shifted from green to yellow. The app displayed a message in plain language that made Daniel's throat tight. Bearing degradation detected, left drum assembly. Estimated time to failure 14 to 21 days. Recommend inspection and replacement. Lily pressed her face against the washer's glass door, watching clothes tumble. It hurt it, Dad. Yeah. The word came out thick. It hurt it. Mr. Park wandered over, curious about the small black device attached to his machine. What's that thing? It's a listener. Tells you when your machines need help before they break. How much? For you, free, forever. Mr. Park looked at the device, then at Daniel, then at Lily. He shook his head slowly, a smile pulling at his mouth. You're a strange man, Daniel Rivers, but a good one. The second unit went to a dry cleaner 3 blocks away whose boiler made sounds that reminded Daniel of things he'd spent 8 years trying not to hear. The third went to Lincoln Elementary, where the HVAC system was failing slowly enough that nobody noticed, except the kids getting headaches from poor air circulation. Within 2 weeks, Daniel had placed 23 prototype units across Chicago's South Side, each one hand-calibrated, each acoustic signature carefully logged into the growing library. He worked mostly at night after his custodial shift ended, installing units in the small hours when business owners were grateful for help they couldn't otherwise afford. Lily came with him sometimes on weekends, her presence a reminder of why he was doing this, who he was building the system for. Not for Victoria's company or Brennan's investment portfolio, but for people who worked with machines and trusted that someone gave a damn about their safety. Victoria called every other day, their conversations short and practical. How's field testing? 23 units deployed, 18 have flagged issues. 14 confirmed by follow-up inspection. That's a 78% detection rate. It'll be higher. The algorithm needs more data. Every installation teaches it something new. Brennan wants to meet next week. He's flying in from Houston. Tell him to come to the laundromat on Ashland Avenue. That's where the first unit is. Victoria laughed, the sound genuine and surprised. I'll tell him exactly that. James Brennan did come to the laundromat, arriving in a black car that looked absurd parked on a street where most people took the bus. He stepped out in a suit that probably cost more than Mr. Park's monthly revenue and stood in front of the industrial washing machine listening to a small black device explain the future. Remarkable. His Texas accent softened the word. Truly remarkable. It's a prototype. Daniel stood with arms crossed, protecting himself from hope, the way he'd learned to protect himself from most things. Still rough. There are calibration issues with certain motor types and the battery life isn't where it needs to be. Son, the concept is proven. That's what matters. My team can handle manufacturing and distribution. What I need from you is the brain, the acoustic library. How many failure signatures have you cataloged so far? 312. Brennan's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. In 6 weeks. Machines talk a lot if you know how to listen. Brennan looked at Lily, who sat on the folding table doing homework with the focused intensity of someone determined to finish before her favorite show came on. Your daughter. Victoria tells me she hears things too. Better than I do most days. Does she want to be an engineer when she grows up? Lily looked up from her math problems pencil, pausing mid-equation. I want to be a listener. Like my dad, but also an engineer. Can I be both? Brennan's face split into a grin that took 20 years off his age. Young lady, I think you can be anything you want. Good, because I also want to be an astronaut. He laughed, the sound bouncing off washing machines and concrete floors. For a moment, standing in a laundromat on Ashland Avenue, surrounded by the smell of detergent and the rumble of equipment that desperately needed maintenance, the distance between a billionaire and a janitor disappeared completely. Then reality reasserted itself the way it always did. Brennan's phone rang with a call he had to take, and the moment fractured. But before he left, he shook Daniel's hand with both of his own, the gesture carrying weight that went beyond business. I lost my boy to a refinery explosion in '89. Jake was 24, had his whole life ahead of him. Equipment had been making strange sounds for weeks, but nobody wanted to shut down production long enough to check. His voice went rough. I was 37 years old when I got that call. I've spent every day since trying to make sure some other father doesn't have to hear what I heard. Daniel understood then why Brennan had flown to Chicago to stand in a laundromat, why he'd agreed to fund a project that would take years to become profitable, why his eyes held recognition when he looked at Daniel. They were members of the same terrible club, the one you joined when you lost someone who should have been saved. We're going to build this. Brennan's grip tightened. We're going to build it right, and we're going to make damn sure it gets to every facility that needs it, whether they can pay or not. 3 months into the project, Daniel got a call at 11:47 at night. He was on custodial shift mopping the 32nd floor when Thomas's name lit up his phone screen. We have a problem. Detroit facility. Daniel killed the floor buffer already moving toward the elevator. What kind? The kind where someone's about to die if we don't stop them. The Detroit Automotive Parts Plant had installed Amelia Protocol Unit 19 3 weeks earlier as part of the field testing program. The device had been monitoring a 40-ton hydraulic press, one of 6 on the main production floor. At 10:32 that evening, Unit 19 had triggered a red alert. Critical failure imminent. Estimated time to catastrophic malfunction, less than 48 hours. The plant manager had looked at the alert, checked his maintenance logs, and dismissed it as a false positive. The press had been inspected 2 months prior and passed with flying colors. There was no way some new-fangled listening device knew better than certified technicians. He'd reset the alarm and put his workers back on the line. Thomas had been monitoring the network remotely, saw the reset, and immediately called the plant's safety coordinator. That conversation had gone nowhere. He'd escalated to the owner, a man named Gary Stubbs, who'd been running Stubbs Manufacturing for 22 years and had strong opinions about computers telling him his business. By the time Thomas reached Daniel, it was 40 minutes past the initial alert, and the press was still running. "I've been on the phone with their safety department for an hour. They say the manager has authority over floor operations and he's made his call." Thomas sounded like a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. "I tried going over his head." The owner backed the manager. Exact quote, "I'm not shutting down a production line because some gadget made a noise." Daniel's hands went cold. Those words. The exact same dismissive arrogance that had killed Amelia, wrapped in different syntax, but carrying identical meaning. He grabbed the edge of a desk hard enough that his knuckles cracked white. "Call Victoria, right now." Victoria answered on the second ring voice alert despite the midnight hour. She'd been reviewing quarterly projections, unable to sleep the particular curse of someone whose brain never fully shut down. Thomas conference called her in, and Daniel explained the situation in flat, controlled sentences that barely contained the rage building in his chest. "What's the failure timeline based on acoustic analysis?" "Seal degradation is advanced. Could be hours, could be days. But every cycle of that press accelerates the damage exponentially." Daniel pulled up the data on his phone, the frequency pattern that showed metal grinding against metal in ways that would soon become catastrophic. "The press operates at 40 tons of force. If the hydraulic seal blows under load, anyone within 15 feet is in the kill zone." "How many workers on that floor?" 37. The press runs 12 feet from the main assembly line." Victoria was silent for exactly 3 seconds. "Get me Gary Stubbs on the phone. Now." It took Thomas 18 minutes to track down Stubbs's personal cell number and another 4 to get him to answer. When Victoria finally had him on the line, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Stubbs, this is Victoria Cross, CEO of Apex Energy Corporation. Your hydraulic press is going to kill someone and you're ignoring the warning." "Ma'am, I don't know who the hell you are or why you're calling me at 1 in the morning, but—" "Your manager inspected that press visually. Our monitoring system detected acoustic signatures consistent with advanced seal degradation. The failure pattern matches 17 other confirmed cases in our database. Every single one of those cases resulted in catastrophic failure within 72 hours. With all due respect, I've been running this plant for 22 years. I don't need some—" "With all due respect, Mr. Stubbs, a woman named Amelia Rivers died because someone said exactly what you're saying right now. She was 31 years old, 7 months pregnant, and she died in a boiler explosion because the plant manager decided an acoustic warning wasn't worth acting on." The line went quiet. Daniel could hear Stubbs breathing, could almost hear the man's certainty beginning to crack. "I am formally notifying you that your equipment has been flagged as an imminent safety hazard. This conversation is being recorded. If you continue to operate that press and someone is injured or killed, this recording will be entered into evidence. I'm also contacting OSHA first thing in the morning to report the hazard directly." "You're threatening me. I'm trying to save your workers' lives, and frankly, I'm trying to save yours because if that press fails and someone dies, you won't just lose your business. You'll lose everything." More silence. Daniel stood in an empty corridor at Apex Energy, fists clenched so tight his fingernails cut crescents into his palms. He was praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in, bargaining with a universe that had already taken everything that mattered, begging for this one thing to go differently than it had 8 years ago. "Fine." Stubbs' voice came out deflated. "I'll shut it down. But if there's nothing wrong with that press, I'm suing you for the lost production. If there's nothing wrong, I'll pay for the lost production myself. You have my word." The press shut down at 2:17 in the morning. An independent inspector arrived at 8, a grizzled man named Mike Torres, who'd been certifying industrial equipment for 30 years and had the scars to prove it. By 9:30, he had the hydraulic assembly disassembled on the factory floor, components spread across a tarp like an autopsy. The seal was cracked in 3 places. Hairline fractures that would have been invisible to visual inspection but showed up immediately under magnification. The hydraulic fluid contained metal particulate consistent with advanced internal corrosion. Torres's report filed that afternoon stated in language designed to survive legal scrutiny that the press was within 48 to 96 hours of catastrophic failure and that operation under load would have posed an imminent risk of fatal injury to nearby personnel. Gary Stubbs called Victoria at 4 that afternoon. His voice sounded different than it had at 1 in the morning, smaller and shaken, stripped of the bluster that came from 22 years of thinking you knew everything. The inspector confirmed it. "You were right." "I wasn't right, Mr. Stubbs. The machine was right. We just listened. I have 37 workers on that floor. The press runs 12 feet from the main line." His breath caught. If that seal had blown during shift, he couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They both knew exactly what would have happened, could picture it with clarity that came from having seen or heard about industrial accidents that turned human beings into statistics. "How much do those monitoring devices cost?" "For my facility." "Nothing. We'll install them at no charge." "Why?" "Because this is why we built them." The Detroit story leaked within 24 hours, not through Apex Energy or Brennan's team, but through the workers themselves. One of the press operators posted on social media, his words carrying the raw emotion of someone who'd just realized how close he'd come to dying. "A little black box saved my life last night. My company ignored it. A woman I've never met called our owner at 1 a.m. and made him shut down a machine that was about to explode. Her name is Victoria Cross. The box was designed by a man named Daniel Rivers. Look them up. The post went viral. 47,000 shares in 12 hours. National news picked it up, then cable, then the morning shows. Suddenly everyone wanted to know about the janitor who could hear danger, about the CEO who'd fought to protect workers at a facility that wasn't even hers, about the device that had prevented what investigators were calling a near-certain multiple fatality event. Daniel hated every second of it. Reporters showed up at the laundromat until Mr. Park threatened to call the police. Someone from Good Morning America tracked down his phone number and offered $5,000 for a 10-minute interview. Victoria's PR team fielded 73 media requests in a single day, all of them asking for access to the man who'd built the listening system. "Tell them no." Daniel's voice was flat when Victoria called to ask how he wanted to handle the attention. "I'm not a story. I'm not a brand. I'm a father who builds things in his kitchen and mops floors at night. That's all I want to be. Marcus, this is good exposure. People knowing about the Amelia Protocol means I said no." The edge in his voice made it clear the conversation was over. "Find another way to market it. I'm not performing for cameras." Victoria honored his boundary, but she couldn't stop what had already been set in motion. The requests kept coming from corporations wanting to license the technology, from universities wanting to study the acoustic library, from government agencies interested in mandatory installation requirements. The pressure built like water behind a dam, and Daniel felt it even as he tried to maintain the small, quiet life he'd constructed. The worst part was Lily. Kids at school had seen their parents watching the news, had heard the story about the janitor genius and his daughter who could hear machines cry. What had been gentle teasing about being different transformed into something sharper. Some kids thought it was cool, wanted to be friends suddenly, which was its own kind of painful. Others resented the attention, found ways to make Lily pay for standing out. She came home crying on a Thursday, the first real tears Daniel had seen since she was small. She wouldn't talk about it at first, just clung to him while her shoulders shook. Eventually, the story came out in fragments. A group of girls had surrounded her at lunch, asking loud questions designed to humiliate. Is it true your dad cleans toilets? Is it true you live above a laundromat? My mom says your family is weird. Daniel held his daughter and felt rage burn through him, hotter than any he'd experienced since the courtroom where they'd ruled Amelia's death inconclusive. He wanted to call the school, demand action, make someone pay for his child's tears. But he knew from experience that adult intervention would only make the social dynamics worse. Listen to me. He pulled back so he could see her face. People who need to put others down are just scared they're not enough. They see something special in you, and it makes them feel small, so they try to make you feel smaller. I don't want to be special. I just want to be normal. The words hit him like physical blows. He'd said the exact same thing to his own father at roughly the same age, frustrated by the way his hearing isolated him from other kids who couldn't understand why he'd stop mid-sentence to listen to something they'd never notice. I know, robot girl, I know it's hard, but normal is overrated. Normal is settling for less than you can be because it's easier than standing out. He smoothed her hair back from her face. You hear things that could save lives. That's not weird. That's a gift. And someday you're going to do something with that gift that matters so much these kids won't even remember being mean to you. She nodded against his chest, but he could feel her doubt, the weight of 10 years spent navigating a world that punished difference, even as it claimed to celebrate it. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel stood in his kitchen staring at the refrigerator covered in her drawings. Machines that could help people, devices that could detect problems before they became disasters, technologies that existed only in her imagination but showed understanding of principles most engineers struggled with. She had Amelia's gift for seeing how things connected, Daniel's ability to hear what others missed, and her own unique way of translating both into something new. And the world was punishing her for it. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria. Brennan wants to accelerate the timeline. Requests from all 50 states. Can you handle training engineers to build the library? He stared at the message for a long time before typing his response. 6 months trial period is over. I'm out. The phone rang immediately. He let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. On the 4th call, he answered, voice rough. I can't do this anymore. Lily's getting bullied at school because of the attention. I'm not sleeping because reporters won't leave us alone. This was supposed to be simple. Build a device, help some people stay invisible. It's become exactly what I walked away from. Daniel. Victoria's voice carried none of its usual corporate precision. I understand, but we're so close. Federal testing phase starts in 2 months. OSHA is considering mandatory recommendations. If we stop now, then it stops. Find someone else to build your empire. This isn't about empire. This is about the 37 workers in Detroit who are alive because you built something that listened. This is about the hundreds of other facilities asking for units because they finally have a way to prevent accidents instead of just investigating them after people die. Daniel pressed his hand against his eyes. I know, and I care about that. But I care about my daughter more. She didn't sign up for this. She doesn't deserve to be punished because her father knows how to hear things. Then we protect her. Private school with security if needed. Anonymity in all public materials, whatever it takes. Victoria paused. But Daniel, if you walk away now, someone else will build a version of this. Some corporation that cuts corners to maximize profit, that sells units to the highest bidder, regardless of who needs them most, that turns your wife's name into marketing material instead of mission. The words landed like she'd intended them to, driving straight into the fear he hadn't articulated even to himself. That's manipulative. It's true. They sat in silence, connected by technology across the distance between her downtown office and his apartment above a laundromat, both of them understanding that this moment would determine whether the Amelia Protocol became what Daniel intended or just another commodified safety product that prioritized shareholders over workers. 2 conditions. His voice came out steady despite the way his hands shook. First, Lily's protection isn't negotiable. School security, everything. Second, I teach on my terms. 2 days a week, my hours, my methods. And if anyone tries to turn this into corporate training modules or packaged courses, I'm gone. Done. Both conditions. You have my word. Daniel looked at Lily's closed bedroom door, at the space where his daughter slept, and dreamed of machines that could help people and astronauts exploring distant worlds. He thought about Amelia, about the promise he'd made at her grave to make sure her death meant something. He thought about the 37 workers in Detroit and the thousands more in facilities across the country who showed up every day and trusted that someone cared whether they made it home. Okay, but Victoria, yes. The second this stops being about saving lives and starts being about profit margins, you and I are done. I don't care how many contracts are signed or how much money Brennan's invested. The mission doesn't change. The mission doesn't change. You have my word on that too. The first class of the Amelia Listening Program convened on a Monday morning in a 7th-floor conference room that smelled like fresh paint and ambition. 12 students filed in their backgrounds spanning the entire American industrial ecosystem. 6 engineers from facilities in Ohio and Pennsylvania. 3 technicians who'd worked assembly lines for decades. 2 safety inspectors from OSHA regional offices, and Thomas Gaines, who sat in the front row with a notebook and headphones and the expression of a man who'd decided to start over at 52. Daniel stood at the front wearing jeans and his work jacket. No slides projected on the wall behind him. No curriculum printed in neat binders. He'd brought exactly one thing: 2 audio files on his laptop, 60 seconds each one from a healthy machine, and one from the same machine 6 hours before catastrophic failure. Close your eyes. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd spent years being ignored and had finally stopped caring whether people listened. I'm going to play 2 sounds. Tell me the difference. He played them both, the room filling with the rumble and hiss of industrial machinery doing what industrial machinery did. When the second file ended, he looked at the engineers, at the technicians who'd spent lifetimes around equipment, at the inspectors trained to spot hazards. Well, silence. Uncomfortable shifting. Finally, one of the engineers, a woman named Sarah Chen from a petrochemical facility in Louisiana, spoke up. They sound the same to me. They do. Daniel's response carried no judgment. To your ears right now, but they're not the same. And by the end of this program, you'll hear the difference as clearly as you hear my voice. Not because I'll teach you some trick, but because I'll teach you to stop listening for what you expect and start hearing what's actually there. He played the recordings again, slower this time, letting the sound wash over them. Most of the students looked confused, a few frustrated, but Thomas sat with eyes closed and head tilted at the precise angle Daniel tilted his own, the angle of someone who'd finally understood that knowing wasn't the same as hearing, and hearing wasn't the same as listening. At the 18-second mark of the third playback, Thomas's eyes snapped open. There, right there, micro skip in the bearing rotation, barely perceptible, but it changes the harmonic envelope. The overtones shift by maybe 0.2 hertz. Daniel looked at him, and something passed between them that might have been respect or recognition, or the particular bond between 2 people who'd been broken by the same realization. How long have you been practicing? Every night since you showed me. I sit in the parking garage after my shift ends and listen to the building breathe. Thomas's voice carried wonder that didn't fit his age or his resume or his 3 decades of trusting data over instinct. I hear everything now, and I can't believe I spent 30 years not hearing it. Daniel nodded once, sharp and final. That's where we start. The program ran 8 weeks, 2 days per week, 4 hours per session. Daniel taught them to differentiate between the sound of metal fatigue and thermal expansion, between bearing degradation and lubrication, breakdown, between the normal settling of a structure under load and the first whispers of structural failure. He taught them to catalog sounds the way a sommelier cataloged wine-building vocabulary for sensations most people experienced as undifferentiated noise. But more than technique, he taught them humility. He made them sit with their eyes closed in maintenance closets and parking garages and equipment rooms, made them spend hours listening to machines they'd walked past 1,000 times without noticing. He forced them to confront how much they'd missed, how many warning signs they'd ignored because the data said everything was fine. Some students washed out. 3 engineers quit in the first 2 weeks, unwilling to abandon the certainty of numbers for the ambiguity of sound. One inspector filed a complaint with Victoria's office claiming the program was unscientific and potentially dangerous, that encouraging workers to trust acoustic analysis over proper inspection protocols would lead to disasters. Victoria forwarded the complaint to Daniel with a single line attached, "Your call. How to handle this." He called the inspector, a man named Robert Morrison, who'd spent 20 years enforcing OSHA regulations and had strong opinions about methodology. They talked for 40 minutes, Daniel explaining the science behind acoustic analysis, Morrison pushing back with statistics and standards. Finally, Daniel asked a question that cut through the arguments. "Have you ever walked through a facility and felt something was wrong but couldn't point to a specific violation?" Morrison went quiet for several seconds. "Yeah, more times than I'd like to admit. That's what this teaches. How to trust that feeling, how to validate it, how to translate intuition into actionable data." Daniel paused. "I'm not asking you to replace inspections with listening. I'm asking you to add another tool to your kit, one that might catch problems before they show up on your clipboard." Morrison didn't come back to the program, but he withdrew his complaint. And 3 months later, he sent Daniel an email with a single line, "You were right. The feeling was right. Found a compressor about to fail in a facility that passed inspection 2 weeks prior. Thank you." 18 months after that midnight session with Victoria and Thomas, the Amelia Protocol operated in 412 facilities across 47 states. The Acoustic Library contained over 6,000 failure signatures spanning 23 industry sectors, from petrochemical refineries to food processing plants, from automotive manufacturing to hospital HVAC systems. 41 graduates of the listening program had deployed across the country, installing units and training workers and building the network that would eventually change how America thought about industrial safety. And Daniel still mopped floors. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, 11 to 7, he showed up at Apex Energy with his cart and his bottles of industrial cleaner and methodically worked his way through 43 floors of corporate infrastructure. The engineers who'd learned from him would nod when they passed him in hallways at 2 in the morning, a quiet acknowledgement that transcended the usual hierarchies. Thomas often worked late specifically to cross paths with Daniel, and they'd have brief conversations about acoustic patterns they'd noticed, problems they'd solved, the strange beauty of machines that communicated in languages most people would never learn. But the victory came with costs Daniel hadn't anticipated. The Alabama textile mill incident happened on a Wednesday afternoon, 300 miles from anywhere Daniel could reach quickly. Amelia Protocol Unit 47 triggered a red alert at 2:37 p.m., flagging catastrophic failure in a steam boiler that powered the facility's pressing equipment. The plant manager shut down operations, immediately sent 200 workers home, called in an emergency inspection team. 48 hours of investigation found nothing wrong. The boiler was clean, properly maintained, operating within all normal parameters. No cracks, no corrosion, no indication of the imminent failure the Amelia unit had predicted. The plant lost $2.1 million in production, and the CEO threatened legal action for damages caused by faulty equipment. The story hit trade publications first, then regional news, then national media, looking for an angle on the feel-good technology that maybe wasn't so reliable after all. Miracle safety device or expensive false alarm. 3 more false positives followed in 2 weeks. Smaller scale but enough to establish a pattern. Ohio manufacturing facility, Pennsylvania food processing plant, Wisconsin paper mill. Every time the Amelia unit screaming danger, every inspection finding nothing wrong. Daniel worked 72 hours straight trying to find the error in his algorithms, the flaw in his acoustic library, the thing he'd missed that was causing the system to cry wolf. His apartment became a research lab, laptops and tablets covering every surface audio files playing on loop while he analyzed waveforms and frequency patterns and tried to understand why his creation was failing. Lily found him asleep at the kitchen table on Saturday morning, head pillowed on his arms, surrounded by data that refused to make sense. She was 11 now, taller and more serious, carrying the weight of being Daniel Rivers' daughter in a school where some kids thought that was cool and others thought it made her a target. "Dad?" She shook his shoulder gently. "You need to sleep in an actual bed." His eyes opened gritty and red. "I need to figure out what's wrong." "What if nothing's wrong? What if the machines are just different than you thought?" The simplicity of it cut through his exhaustion. He sat up looking at his daughter who somehow understood things he was too close to see. Different how? Like how people age and get wrinkles and their voice changes. Maybe machines do that too. Maybe old machines sound different than the library expects, so the system thinks they're sick when they're just old. Daniel stared at her for 5 full seconds before grabbing the nearest laptop. He pulled up the data from all 5 false positives and overlaid them with equipment age and service history. The pattern emerged immediately obvious once he knew to look for it. Every false positive had come from equipment manufactured in the mid-90s machines that had been running for 20 to 30 years with regular maintenance but inevitable wear. The Amelia protocol compared acoustic signatures to factory-new baselines, but older equipment developed harmonic drift as components settled, as tolerances changed, as the natural aging process created new acoustic fingerprints. The system was reading that drift as degradation instead of adaptation. "Oh my God," his voice came out as a whisper. "It's calibration error. The baseline keeps changing and I never accounted for dynamic adaptation." Lily looked at him with Amelia's eyes and his own intensity and something uniquely her. "So you can fix it." "Yeah, robot girl, I can fix it." The solution took 4 days to code and 3 more to test across the entire deployed network. Dynamic baseline calibration that learned each machine's unique aging signature, adapting the failure detection algorithm to account for gradual harmonic drift while still catching acute degradation. When Victoria presented the update to the board, the false positive rate dropped from 7% to 0.8, well within industry standards. Walter Haynes sat across the conference table with arms crossed and the expression of someone who'd been waiting months for an opportunity. He was 71, carried the board votes that could destroy Victoria's career, and had made it clear he considered the Amelia Protocol a liability disguised as innovation. 0.8% is acceptable. 7% nearly destroyed our credibility. His fingers drummed against expensive wood. The question is whether we can trust this system not to fail again when it matters most. Victoria met his eyes without flinching. Every system fails, Walter. The question is whether we learn from failures or use them as excuses to stop trying. Pretty philosophy, but we're not a philosophy company. We're an energy company that's somehow become responsible for safety equipment that just cost 4 businesses millions in unnecessary shutdowns. Those businesses are all using the updated system now, free of charge, and we've committed to covering losses from any future false positives during the testing phase. She leaned forward. "Would you rather we'd hidden the problem? Pretended the false positives didn't matter. I'd rather we'd done proper testing before deploying to 400 facilities. And how many people would have died while we perfected the testing? How many Detroit incidents would we have missed?" Her voice could have cut steel. "This technology saves lives, Walter. Real people who go to work and trust that someone cares whether they come home. I'm not apologizing for moving fast to protect them." The board voted 7-5 to continue the program with enhanced oversight. Walter voted against, but his coalition had fractured. 3 members who'd previously backed him had seen the data from Detroit, had read the inspector's report about the hydraulic press that would have killed dozens, and had decided that imperfect safety was better than perfect negligence. But Walter's warning hung in the air after the meeting ended. One more crisis, one more failure, and he'd have the votes to shut everything down. 6 weeks later, the phone call Daniel had been dreading finally came. Not from Victoria or Thomas, but from Patricia Owens, chair of the National Safety Board, calling from Washington at 2 in the afternoon while Daniel was walking Lily home from school. Mr. Rivers, we're considering a formal recommendation that the Amelia Protocol become standard equipment for all federally regulated industrial facilities. We'd like testimony, and we need it from you. Lily was talking about a science project involving sound propagation through different materials, her voice animated in the way it got when she'd discovered something that excited her. Daniel held up one finger, asking her to pause, and turned his focus to the phone. Dr. Owens, I appreciate the consideration, but I don't do public testimony. I've been clear about that from the beginning. I understand your reluctance, but this isn't a media appearance, Mr. Rivers. This is Congress. These are the people who write the rules that protect workers, the same rules that failed your wife. The words landed exactly where she'd aimed them, and Daniel hated her for the precision, even as he understood the necessity. Lily had stopped talking and was watching him with the particular attention children develop when they sense adult conversations shifting into dangerous territory. When, 2 weeks, Tuesday morning, you'd present to a joint committee examining industrial safety standards. Your testimony would inform recommendations that could mandate installation in over 300,000 facilities. Daniel looked at his daughter, at the space between her world and the one he'd been dragged back into against every instinct. I need to think about it. Mr. Rivers, people are dying in workplace accidents that could be prevented. You have information that could change that. I'm not asking you to be comfortable. I'm asking you to do what's right. He hung up and stood on a sidewalk in Chicago while traffic rushed past, and Lily waited for him to explain why his face had gone pale. That night after she'd gone to bed, he called Victoria. They want me to testify. National Safety Board, Joint Congressional Committee, the whole formal nightmare. I know. Dr. Owens called me first to ask if I thought you'd agree. Victoria's voice carried the particular weariness of someone who'd spent 18 months managing Daniel's boundaries while trying to build something that mattered. What did you tell her? That I'd think about it. But we both know I can't do this. Standing in front of Congress, cameras everywhere, my face attached to this forever. That's exactly what I swore I'd never do again. Then don't do it. I'll testify. Thomas will testify. We have data and case studies and everything they need to make an informed decision. But they want me. The guy who built it, the janitor who hears things, the human interest story that makes dry policy sexy for the news cycle. Bitterness crept into his voice despite his best efforts to keep it neutral. They don't want testimony. They want a performance. Victoria was quiet for several seconds. What does Lily think? The question surprised him. I haven't told her yet. Maybe you should. She's 11, Daniel. Old enough to understand what's at stake. Old enough to have opinions about what you should do. He found Lily the next morning at the kitchen table working on the homework she'd neglected in favor of her sound project. She had Amelia's focus when she concentrated the ability to tune out the entire world and exist purely in whatever problem demanded solving. Robot girl, we need to talk about something. She looked up, pencil pausing mid-equation, and he saw the flash of worry cross her face. The same worry she'd carried since the bullying started, the fear that anything out of routine meant something bad was coming. The people in Washington who make rules about safety want me to explain the Amelia Protocol to Congress. They want me to talk about how it works and why it matters and tell Mom's story to help them understand why we built it. Lily set down her pencil with careful precision. Do you have to? No. I can say no and they'll find someone else. Victoria or Thomas or one of the other engineers. The project keeps going either way. But they want you specifically. Yeah, they think it's important that the person who designed it explains why it exists. She was quiet for a long moment, her face working through calculations he could only guess at. Will there be cameras? Probably. Will people at school see it? Maybe. He wouldn't lie to her not about this. There might be more attention for a while, but it would die down eventually. Lily looked at her homework at the equations about trajectory and velocity that suddenly seemed less important than the conversation they were having. What does Mom think? The question hit him in the solar plexus. What? If Mom could tell you what to do, what would she say? Daniel's throat went tight. He thought about Amelia standing in that conference room 8 years ago, standing up for him when the plant manager dismissed his warnings. He thought about how she'd never stayed quiet when something mattered, how she'd fought for people even when fighting cost her something. She'd tell me to stop being scared and do what needs doing. His voice came out rough. She'd say that if I have information that could save lives, hiding from cameras is just selfishness dressed up as privacy. Then you should probably do it. Lily's voice was small but certain. Even if it's hard. Because Mom's right. He pulled her into a hug, this daughter who carried more wisdom at 11 than he'd managed in 40 years, and made the decision he'd known he would make from the moment Dr. Owens called. Washington, D.C. was everything Daniel hated about visibility condensed into one city. He arrived on Monday evening wearing the same charcoal suit the tailor on Halstead had made for Amelia's funeral, altered now to fit a body that had lost weight from stress and gained it back from Victoria's insistence that he eat properly. Lily came with him non-negotiable, and Victoria had arranged a hotel suite large enough that she could do homework while he prepared testimony he had no idea how to deliver. Thomas flew in from Chicago that night, arriving at the hotel at 9:30 with takeout and the particular energy of someone on a mission. He'd become Daniel's advocate in the corporate world, the translator who could take acoustic insights and transform them into language that boards and committees understood. I've been coaching executives on testimony for 15 years. You're going to be fine. Daniel sat at the desk in the suite's living room, surrounded by notes he'd made and discarded speech drafts that all sounded fake. I'm going to freeze up there. Cameras everywhere, people watching, and I'll forget how to speak English. Then don't give a speech. Tell a story. Tell them about Amelia, about the boiler, about standing in a conference room knowing what was going to happen and watching people ignore you. Thomas pulled up a chair. Tell them about Sophie sitting on that conference room table at Apex telling us the turbines were scared. Tell them about the hydraulic press in Detroit and the 37 workers who are alive because we built something that listened. They want data, not stories. They want both. Data tells them what's possible. Stories tell them why it matters. Thomas leaned forward. You know what Victoria told me once? She said you changed her life because you reminded her that the best technology isn't the one with the most features. It's the one that cares about the people using it. That's what you tell them tomorrow. They practiced until midnight, Daniel stumbling through testimony that felt simultaneously too personal and not personal enough. Thomas offering suggestions that slowly shaped chaos into something resembling coherence. Lily fell asleep on the couch, watching them work her homework, abandoned in favor of witnessing her father try to become someone he'd never wanted to be. The hearing room was smaller than Daniel expected, but more intimidating, wood paneling and flags, and the seal of the United States watching from above the committee members' bench. 15 senators and representatives sat in a curved line, their faces carrying the particular neutrality of politicians who'd learned to hide reactions until they knew which way the wind was blowing. Behind them, observers filled rows of seats, and at the back, cameras recorded everything for posterity and the evening news. Victoria sat in the front row with Thomas and James Brennan, who'd flown up from Houston specifically for this. Lily sat between Victoria and Thomas, her blue dress carefully chosen for its simplicity, her hands folded in her lap in a way that made her look older than 11. Dr. Owens called the hearing to order at 9:47. Victoria testified first, presenting corporate overview and deployment statistics and data about false positive rates. Thomas followed with technical architecture, walking the committee through acoustic analysis methodology in language designed for people whose expertise lay in policy rather than engineering. Brennan spoke about distribution networks and his company's commitment to funding installation in facilities that couldn't afford upfront costs. Then, Dr. Owens called Daniel's name and the room pivoted to face him. He walked to the witness table with legs that didn't quite feel connected to his body. The microphone sat at mouth level, and the glare from overhead lights made the committee members' faces slightly blurry. He could see Lily watching him, Victoria giving the tiniest encouraging nod, Thomas mouthing the word, "breathe." "Mr. Rivers, thank you for being here today. Thank you for the invitation." His voice came out steadier than expected. "I'd like to start by asking you to tell this committee about your background and how you came to design the Amelia Protocol." Daniel's hands rested flat on the table in front of him, and he made himself maintain that contact, grounding himself in something solid while everything else threatened to dissolve. "My name is Daniel Rivers. I work as a night custodian at Apex Energy Corporation in Chicago, Illinois. I also designed the Amelia Protocol. I named it after my wife." The room settled into absolute attention, the kind of silence that happens when people sense they're about to hear something that matters. 8 years ago, my wife Amelia went to work at a packaging plant on Chicago's South Side. She was a floor supervisor, 7 months pregnant with our daughter. 3 years earlier, I'd done acoustic analysis on their equipment as a consultant. I found a critical flaw in their boiler, a microfracture that was invisible to visual inspection but showed up clearly in acoustic signatures. I filed a report. I flagged it urgent. I called the plant manager twice. His throat wanted to close. He breathed through his nose, counting to 3, continuing. "The manager told me, and I'm quoting from his email that later appeared in Discovery, we can't shut down every time some consultant hears a funny noise. The repair would have cost $11,000. 2 days of shutdown. They decided the numbers didn't justify it." A woman in the committee, Senator Patricia Morrison from Michigan, removed her glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes. 17 days later, the boiler exploded. 3 people were killed instantly. One of them was my wife. My daughter was 7 months old. She never knew her mother. His voice cracked on the last word, and he didn't try to hide it. Let them hear the grief. Let them understand what ignoring warnings actually cost. I sued. The company hired lawyers from a firm that charged more per hour than I earned in a week. The case dragged on for 2 years. The court ruled the evidence was inconclusive, that acoustic analysis wasn't standard methodology, that my findings were speculative. I lost. I lost my savings to legal fees. I nearly lost custody of my daughter when the stress triggered a breakdown. He looked directly at the committee, now no longer seeing individuals, but the system they represented, the machinery of rules and regulations that was supposed to protect people, and failed so often it had become expected. After Amelia died, I quit. I quit engineering. I quit consulting. I quit the world that had taken my wife and then told me my ears were lying. I became a janitor because I wanted a life where nobody asked me to hear anything, where I could be invisible and safe. Lily was crying silently in the front row, tears tracking down her face while Victoria held her hand. But I couldn't stop hearing things. Machines talk whether you want them to or not. My daughter hears them too. She's 11 years old and she hears things. Computers can't detect patterns that predict failure before any sensor registers a problem. He paused, gathering the threads of his story, weaving them into something that might actually change minds. The Amelia Protocol isn't complicated technology. It's a microphone and an algorithm that does one simple thing: it listens. It pays attention to the sounds machines make when they're healthy, and it notices when those sounds change. That's all. But that simple thing has already prevented 47 confirmed equipment failures across the United States, including a hydraulic press in Detroit, Michigan that was 48 hours from catastrophic failure on a floor with 37 workers. His voice had found its strength now, the words coming faster, fueled by 8 years of grief transformed into purpose. 37 people who would have gotten phone calls, 37 families who would have been destroyed the way mine was. 37 versions of the worst sound in the world, the sound of someone telling you that the person you love isn't coming home. Senator Morrison had tears on her face now, not bothering to hide them. I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't work for Apex Energy in any capacity that matters. I'm not an executive or a businessman. I'm a janitor who mops floors at night and teaches engineers to listen during the day. I built this system because my wife died and nobody listened. I'm asking you to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else. I'm asking you to mandate that every facility in this country has access to technology that might prevent the next Amelia Rivers from dying because someone decided $11,000 wasn't worth the cost. He sat back suddenly, empty the adrenaline that had carried him through testimony draining away and leaving him hollowed out. Dr. Owens looked at her fellow committee members, some silent communication passing between them. Mr. Rivers, I've been on this board for 14 years. I've heard hundreds of presentations in this room. That's the first one that made me want to go home and listen to my furnace. A few people laughed, the tension breaking slightly. Dr. Owens leaned forward, her expression softer than her professional demeanor usually allowed. One question. You said you quit engineering to be invisible. You're not invisible anymore. How does that feel? Daniel thought about Lily, crying in the front row about the reporters who'd camped outside the laundromat, about the way his life had been systematically dismantled and reassembled into something he barely recognized. He thought about Amelia and the promise he'd made at her grave about the 37 workers in Detroit and the thousands more whose names he'd never know. It feels like I'm keeping a promise to someone who can't hear me anymore. The room held its silence for a long moment. Then Dr. Owens nodded, and something in her face suggested decisions had already been made, votes already counted in the invisible calculus of politics and policy. Thank you, Mr. Rivers. We'll be in touch. The recommendation came 6 weeks later, announced in language so bureaucratic it took 3 readings to understand what it actually meant. The Amelia Protocol was designated as Category 1 safety device recommended for mandatory installation in all federally regulated industrial facilities. 3-year rollout priority given to high-risk sectors. The estimated cost would run into billions funded through a combination of federal grants, state safety budgets, and private sector partnerships. Daniel found out on a Tuesday morning while making pancakes with robot faces, his phone lighting up with Victoria's call at 7:32. It passed. Unanimous vote. Every committee member signed the recommendation. He turned off the stove and sat at the kitchen table, phone pressed to his ear, unable to process the magnitude of what she was saying. Lily looked up from her cereal, reading his face for clues about whether this was good news or bad. What does that mean, practically? It means that within 3 years, every major industrial facility in America will have Amelia Protocol units monitoring their equipment. It means OSHA inspectors will check for installation the same way they check for fire extinguishers. It means we're going to save thousands of lives. It passed, sweetheart. His voice came out thick. The government's going to require the Amelia Protocol everywhere. Every factory, every plant, every place where people work with machines that could hurt them. Lily put down her spoon and came around the table. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, and he held her back. His face pressed into her hair, while tears he couldn't name leaked from his eyes. They weren't grief exactly, though grief was part of it. They were relief and exhaustion, and the particular pain of victory that came too late to save the person it was built for. Are you doing the good crying, Dad? Yeah, baby. The good crying. Okay. She pulled back to look at him, her face serious. Your pancakes are burning, though. He laughed, the sound broken and raw and real, and rescued the pancakes from the griddle. One had burned beyond recognition, the robot face transformed into something unidentifiable. Lily studied it critically. That one looks like Mr. Gaines. Don't tell him that. I'm definitely telling him that. They ate breakfast together while morning light filled the kitchen, and the world continued spinning toward a future where Amelia's name would be attached to technology in 300,000 facilities. where workers would clock in and trust that something was paying attention to the machines around them, listening for warnings that human ears couldn't catch. Where $11,000 repairs would be made before they became million-dollar disasters that cost lives instead of just money. Walter Haynes called Victoria that afternoon with a message so brief she initially thought it was a pocket dial. "I was wrong about the janitor. His name is Daniel Rivers, and I was wrong." The board met the following Thursday, and Walter withdrew his motion for a vote of no confidence. He didn't apologize explicitly, but when Victoria presented the federal recommendation and the projected impact, he voted in favor of every proposal she made. Increased funding for the listening program, expansion of the training curriculum, partnerships with universities to develop the next generation of acoustic engineers. In the hallway after the meeting, he stopped her with a hand on her arm. "I have a daughter. She's 35, works in a chemical plant in Texas. And after I heard Rivers's testimony, I realized that if something happened to her because equipment failed and someone had heard it but nobody listened." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I spent 6 months trying to shut this down because I thought you were chasing headlines instead of profits. I was wrong. This matters more than anything else we'll ever do." Victoria watched him walk away, this 71-year-old man who'd spent his entire career trusting balance sheets and had finally understood that some numbers couldn't capture what was actually valuable. 2 years after Daniel knelt on concrete and pressed his ear against a turbine, the Amelia Protocol operated in 89,000 facilities across all 50 states. It had prevented 312 confirmed equipment failures and saved an estimated 1,400 lives, though the actual number was probably higher given all the accidents that didn't happen and were never recorded. 200 graduates of the listening program had deployed nationwide, and universities were adding acoustic analysis to their mechanical engineering curricula. And Daniel still worked Tuesday and Thursday nights at Apex Energy 11 to 7, mopping floors and replacing paper towels and listening to a building that had become family over 6 years of invisible labor. The work grounded him, reminded him who he'd built the system for. Not shareholders or politicians or even the grateful facility managers who sent him thank you emails he never answered. He'd built it for people like Rosa Martinez, who cleaned the 8th floor and had worked at Apex for 23 years and made $2 more per hour than he did. He'd told Victoria once early in their partnership that he kept the custodial work because it kept him honest. Because the second he forgot he was building safety equipment for people who mopped floors and operated presses and showed up every day to jobs that didn't make headlines, he'd become exactly what he'd walked away from. Victoria had understood in a way that surprised him. She'd started coming to the office at odd hours not to check on her executives, but to talk with the custodial staff, the security guards, the maintenance workers who kept the building running. She learned their names, asked about their families, listened to their concerns about equipment that made strange sounds or worked inconsistently. And when she encountered a problem, she brought it to Daniel, and together they'd figure out whether it was something the Amelia Protocol could help with. On a Thursday night, 18 months into the federal rollout, Daniel was cleaning the 43rd floor when he saw the sticky note on Victoria's office door. She left them regularly now, a tradition that had started as a practical way to communicate and evolved into something that felt like friendship. "Daniel, a C on this floor sounds off again. Normal. Also, Lily's project won state science fair. Tell her congratulations from me." He peeled the note off, carefully folded it, and added it to the collection he kept in his locker. 37 notes over 2 years, a record of problems solved and victories celebrated, and the slow building of trust between two people who'd started as CEO and janitor and become something harder to define. The air conditioning was just a clogged filter, nothing serious. He made a note for maintenance and continued his rounds. At 3:14 in the morning, his phone rang. Thomas calling from the parking garage where he still sat some nights listening to the building and finding peace in the sounds most people filtered out as irrelevant. "Rivers, I'm hearing something in the ventilation. Doesn't sound right. On my way." He found Thomas standing in the middle of the garage, eyes closed, head tilted in the listening position they'd both adopted. At 54, Thomas had transformed completely from the man who'd called Daniel a janitor with contempt in his voice. He'd filed for divorce from the wife who hadn't understood why he'd started spending evenings in parking garages instead of at home, and he'd filed the papers with something that looked like relief. He'd found purpose in teaching the listening program, and his students spoke of him with the kind of respect usually reserved for prophets. "There, you hear it, 18 hertz oscillating." Daniel listened, tracking the sound through concrete and steel. Return duct, loose baffle resonating with the exhaust fan. Dangerous, annoying, like a snore. Thomas grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I heard it from my apartment. 3 miles away. I swear I heard it." "You didn't hear it from 3 miles away. But you felt that something was wrong, and you were right." They stood together in the parking garage at 3 in the morning, janitor and chief engineer, two men separated by everything the world used to measure worth, but connected by the understanding that the most important technology ever invented wasn't computers or sensors or algorithms. It was a human being who cared enough to pay attention. "Go home, Rivers. Get some sleep." "Can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I hear things." "Welcome to my world." Thomas laughed, and the sound echoed off concrete and metal. At the garage entrance, he paused. "Hey, Rivers. You know you changed my life, right? I just want to make sure you know that." Daniel pushed his cart forward, the wheels squeaking in a pattern he'd been meaning to oil for months. "Go home, Thomas." Yeah. Thomas waved and disappeared into the night, heading toward an apartment where he lived alone, but no longer felt lonely because he'd learned to hear the world singing. Daniel stood in the empty garage listening. The building breathed around him, thousands of systems running their invisible cycles. The elevator on 12, the one Lily had noticed years ago, ran smooth now after bearing replacement. The water pipes hummed at frequencies that indicated proper pressure. The foundation itself produced vibrations so low they registered as feeling more than sound, the deep seismic heartbeat of a structure standing against gravity. And underneath it all, if he listened with his whole heart, the way Lily had taught him, the way Amelia had shown him before she'd been taken, he could hear something that sounded like vindication, like promises kept, like a woman's voice saying the world needs people who listen and thank you for not giving up. He opened his eyes and picked up his mop and went back to work, because some promises you keep forever and some voices you never stop hearing even when they're silent. The world was full of machines crying out, and finally someone was listening.